What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is Lazy Daze Tubby, and I'm back at it again on my solo channel doing some more history reaction for you guys today, and it's some more Kings and Generals content for you. So I'm really enjoying his content over here, and we have got his early Muslim expansion series, and it's episode 1 part 4 for you guys today. I'm really enjoying finding out some more about the Muslim history and more about Middle Eastern history in general. This is a really good story. Obviously it's only episode 1, but I've enjoyed it and I'm glad that I have got to it, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what else he has got for us after we get this episode done. If you guys haven't already, please head over to Kings and Generals page. A link is going to be in the description box down below. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we are just going to jump straight into this one.
The Muslim army was getting used to the new command structure, and using this pause, Heraclius was bringing more forces into the region, by land to Antioch, and, as the Romans had complete naval control, by sea to the various ports.
Okay.
The second group was to be commanded by Theodore Trithyrius, the treasurer of the empire, and in December of 634, it started assembling to the west of Pella, which was the perfect place to launch an eastward attack, cutting the line of communications with Arabia. It is not clear how big this army was. Spies had informed Abu Ubaidah about this threat in December, and in early January of 635, he marched south towards Pella, leaving a corps under Yazid behind.
Okay.
As soon as the small garrison of Pella learned of this, it retreated towards the main army, flooding the river Jordan and creating a swamp-like territory dividing the Byzantine and Arab armies.
Okay, smart.
After occupying Pella, the Arab army commanders decided to move towards Baisan to engage Theodore.
What they can do
They
about
didn't
it.
know the terrain of this area well, so soon after, the vanguard led by Khalid got stuck in the mud, and the Muslims were forced to withdraw back to Pella. Theodore waited for a week or so, hoping that his foes would become less vigilant. On the 23rd of January, he marched his troops towards the river with a plan to attack the Muslim camp at night. However, the Muslims had placed scout troops along the river, so as soon as the Romans started crossing, the Arab camp was informed of it and started to form up for battle. We have only limited details on the battle, which, according to the Arab sources, raged through the night and most of the next day. The Romans were able to push their counterparts back to the camp using their slightly larger numbers. According to one chronicle, Theodore was wounded in one of the charges, and the resultant loss of morale made the Romans retreat. When they began crossing a marsh, the Arabs used this to their advantage. They attacked, killing thousands.
Oh wow.
The rest returned to Baisan.
What a good small victory.
Whatever was left of the Roman army dispersed into various garrisons to the west and south, while Theodore returned to Antioch by sea. There was no army to fight back against Abu Ubaidah, so he divided his army into corps to conquer as many cities as possible. Shurabil took Baisan and then Tiberias. Afterwards, Shurabil and Amr bin al-As went south, while Abu Ubaidah and Khalid marched north. By March of 635, the Muslims were in control of the whole region to the south of Beirut, save for Caesarea, which withstood a siege reinforced by Heraclius, and Jerusalem, which had the strongest fortifications. Heraclius probably thought that the Muslims would be busy with the sieges, and he had some time, so he was recruiting in order to counterattack in 636. Simultaneously, an alliance with Yazdegerd was established. Heraclius married his granddaughter to the young Sassanid Shah. It was planned that the Persians would attack Muslim positions from the east. Meanwhile, Abu Ubaidah's 15,000 were moving north, and by November took over the territory between Damascus and Emesa, putting this major city in danger. Heraclius rushed reinforcements, which brought the strength of the garrison commanded by Harbeis to 8,000. In early December, the city was besieged. Harbeis hoped that the Arabs, who weren't used to the cold, would not be able to sustain the siege for too long. At the same time, Emesa was a well-fortified city, with walls 1 mile in diameter, a moat surrounding it, and a citadel within the walls. So the defenders' situation wasn't hopeless.
No, that's
the Muslims
strong
weren't strong
defense.
at the art of siegecraft at that point, and the lack of siege weapons made an assault impossible. So for weeks and then months, the sides did nothing but exchange arrow volleys.
But then
By March of 636, winter began to subside, and it was becoming clear that the Arab army was planning to starve the Emesans. Food supplies were getting dangerously low, so Harbees decided to sally out and kill as many foes as possible, believing that it might end the siege. He left small units to defend the walls and concentrated more than 5,000 near the southern gates. Initially, this sortie was very successful. The Muslims were caught unprepared and were outnumbered 2 to 1, which led to hundreds of casualties and forced them to retreat under Harbees' pressure. However, Khalid managed to get his cavalry together, arriving to the area of battle shortly after. The numbers were now on the Arab side, and this was enough for the Romans to break off the fight and return to the safety of the walls. The defenders were jubilant, and not at all surprised when the Muslim army gathered to the south and started withdrawing. Harbees decided that he could score a brilliant victory and immediately marched out of the city with the same 5,000. He caught up with the retreating Muslims a few miles to the south, but as soon as his mounted troops started charging, Abu Ubaida's units turned back and attacked. A few minutes later, the Romans were surrounded from all sides. Harbees was killed, and only a few hundred of his soldiers escaped. After a short battle, the Arabs returned to the city, and the garrison, which was left leaderless, surrendered.
Of course I would.
Meanwhile, to the north, Emperor Heraclius had been preparing an army to counterattack for some time. Various sources provide numbers of this army ranging from a very modest 30,000 to the fantastical 400,000. It should be noted that the chroniclers who wrote on this war lived at least 1 or 2 generations after the events, so their depictions weren't based on first or even second-hand accounts. We know that at the peak of the Byzantine Sassanid War of 602 to 628, Heraclius was able to raise an army of 70,000 for his attack on the Sassanid Empire, but that army had a considerable Gokturk element. At the same time, the Byzantines had to keep some forces in Italy, the Balkans and the Caucasus in order to check the encroaching Lombards, Slavs, Avars and Khazars. In our opinion, the Byzantines outnumbered their opponents at least 2 to 1, but considering the logistical situation in the area of operation, their numbers were below 100,000. Heraclius, who was now in his 60s, suffered from edema, so he wasn't going to lead the army, predominantly made of Greeks, Armenians and Christian Arabs, personally. Instead, the army was divided into 5 columns, commanded by 5 generals. The plan was to engage and surround the Muslim forces around Emesa, and use another column to take Damascus, and prevent the troops of the Caliphate operating to the south from reinforcing the northern group. The army left Antioch in the middle of June. Unfortunately for the Romans, a few days before their leading column reached Emesa, the Arabs learned about the counterattack, either from their spies or from the prisoners they took while raiding Shaizar. So Abu Ubaidah ordered his corps to fall back. Initially, the idea was to retreat to Damascus to preserve this conquest, but the city was surrounded by open space that would have given an army with superior numbers an advantage, so the Arabs started retreating towards Jabiya, which was located between the river Yarmouk to the south, Lake Tiberias to the west, and the desert to the east. Messengers were sent to the southern group with the order to march towards Jabiya. The Byzantines, who barely missed an opportunity to crush their opponents around Emesa, started chasing the Arabs, slowly coalescing after taking the city.
They're going to break formations or break lines, right?
And continued south, and sometime in the middle of July 636, their vanguard made contact with the Caliphate's rearguard to the north of Jabiya. The Arab commanders, who initially liked their position, now understood that they might be attacked from the southwest. via the narrow passage between Lake Tiberias and the River Yarmouk. The Byzantine field army could have engaged them from the front, while the garrison of Caesarea might have attacked using the passage. Therefore, Abu Ubaidah left Khalid in command of the rearguard and started repositioning his troops. The latter engaged the Byzantine vanguard, led by the light Christian Arab horsemen, allowing the rest of the army to move unharassed.
Okay.
The Muslims encamped in the eastern part of the plain of Yarmouk. Some distance to the east of them were the lava hills, stretching from north to east of Ezra, and the mountains of Jabal ad-Druz. A few days later, probably in the last days of July, the Roman army entered the plain and built a fortified camp in its western part. With the central portion of the plain left unoccupied, the army started preparing for battle by scouting the enemy positions. The sources mention extensive negotiations which continued for weeks, but the
really
details of the talks are convoluted.
This is not looking good at all.
In short, they ended in failure and the battle was inevitable.
Of course
According to some sources, the Caliph's reinforcements, consisting of 5,000 famous Yemeni archers and 1,000 footmen who were veterans of the earliest Muslim campaigns in Arabia, joined the army sometime during this negotiation. The battlefield was enclosed on its western and southern sides by deep ravines. To the west, Wadi-ur-Rakad flowed into the Yarmouk River near Yekasa. This stream ran northeast to southwest for 11 miles through a deep ravine with very steep banks. The ravine was crossable at a few places, but there was only one main crossing, where the village of Kafir-ul-Ma stands today.
Okay.
South of the battlefield ran the canyon of the Yarmouk River, while deserts occupied the north and east of it. The plain was mostly flat, save for a small hill called Samain. On the 14th of August, the Roman army moved forward and started forming up to the east and north of Alan. It is debated whether the army was commanded by the Armenian general Vahan, or each of the 5 corps had a separate leader. The Byzantine army positioned itself as follows.
I would have thought that there'd be a commander for each, personally.
As follows. The light Ghassanid cavalry of Jabala was stretched across the plain as the vanguard, with the objective of screening the army and skirmishing with the enemy. Kanatir commanded the left flank, while Grigori was on the right flank, and 2 central corps were led by Dejan and Vahan. The Romans had spear and sword infantry in the first rank, archers in the second, and cavalry behind them.
Okay.
Although Abu Ubaidah was the overall commander appointed by the Caliph, sources claim that he allowed Khalid to be the one giving the orders. The Muslim force matched the widths of the Roman army, but as it was smaller, its formation wasn't as deep. Khalid moved some of his light cavalry to the vanguard to observe the Romans. The infantry was divided into 4 corps, made up of 9 units each, with infantry in the front and archers behind them. There were 3 cavalry units behind each flank and centre, while Khalid's mobile cavalry unit served as a reserve.
Okay.
The Arab commander's plan was to defend and tire his foe, and then counterattack when possible. Both armies had a southern flank secured by the River Yarmouk, while the northern flank bordering the desert offered a chance to outflank the enemy. The Battle of Yarmouk started on August 15th, 636, with the Roman light cavalry vanguard moving behind the main army, mostly reinforcing the left flank cavalry. The Arab vanguard did the same and joined the main cavalry units. It is unusual to see a battle fought in this era which wasn't started by a clash of light skirmishers, but the sources didn't mention this happening, instead insisting that the champions of both sides dueled for a few hours. In any case, after the screening forces pulled back, a third of the Roman infantry advanced across the front at midday. Soon the Roman footmen clashed with their counterparts, while the archers in the second rank skirmished, sending volleys above the heads of their infantry. The details of this first day are scarce, but it is possible that the Byzantines decided that a reconnaissance in force would provide benefits. Their attack was slow and lacked determination. After a few hours of fighting, they disengaged and returned to their initial positions. The first day of battle was over, and the sides returned to their respective camps. At night, a few Roman light cavalry units moved forward, but they were caught by their Arab counterparts and forced back. These raids were seemingly disjointed and lacked an objective, as they were not conducted by nearly enough troops to do much damage. However, they allowed the Romans to form up in the darkness without alerting the enemy. The plan was to attack the Muslims as early as possible, not giving them the opportunity to get into formation. Indeed, the whole Roman army attacked before dawn. Some sources claim they knew of the Muslim religious rites, that one of their prayers happened at this time, and decided to use it to their advantage. Unfortunately for the attackers, the same light cavalry patrols who fought them during the night were ordered to remain in front, and as soon as the Romans came into contact with these forward units, the Arabs retreated to their main force and informed them of the impending attack.
Did they get enough time?
To the surprise of the Romans, their foes managed to prepare for the attack. However, they had their orders, and so the second day of the battle began.
Nice.
The Roman plan was to tie up the Muslim army's centre and pressure its
How
wings.
The Muslim can get out
to
of
that
this?
end, the
They're
attack in the middle
outnumbered.
was
What they
relatively
can do?
passive. The Byzantine left attacked the Muslim right head-on. The first two attempts to break through failed, but the Byzantines had a numerical advantage and used it. Fresh troops moved to the front, and the third attack pushed the Arabs back. Some of them started retreating towards their camp, and some joined the centre right. This opened a way for a counterattack by the Arab right-wing cavalry. Its charge wasn't strong enough to force the Romans back, but tied them up for some time, allowing the infantry to retreat. Soon the cavalry was unable to withstand the pressure and also retreated. Later Muslim sources mention that the wives of the retreating warriors shamed them into returning to the battle. We don't know if that is true, but the Arab right flank reformed and started marching towards the approaching enemy. Meanwhile, the Roman right, which was probably made of the best heavy infantry in the empire, was even more successful.
Oh no.
Some sources mention that it was fighting in a testudo formation, but that is probably an anachronism.
Both flanks are gone. Both flanks are gone.
The first or the second attack by this group drove the Muslim left flank back, and they hastily retreated towards the camp. Similar to what happened on the other side of the battlefield, the Muslim cavalry attempted to stem the enemy advance with a counterattack, but it failed, and the horsemen joined their infantry en route to the camp. The sources once again claim that their wives urged them to return to the battle and even threw stones at their husbands. As the Roman right was slower due to its heavier armour, the Arabs had more time to rearrange their line and move towards the Romans. An attentive viewer might ask why the Byzantines didn't exploit these breakthroughs by pouring troops between the gaps in the Muslim formations, or by outflanking the enemy right by widening the front. In truth, we don't have answers to these questions, but it can be assumed that the fresh Muslim cavalry in the centre and in the reserve probably discouraged the former, while the latter was dangerous due to the fact that the Arabs had already used desert terrain numerous times in the past to outflank the Byzantines.
I see. They're just being super cautious.
It was noon, and Khalid had just been watching the battle until that moment, but seeing the return of the wings spurred him into action, taking command of the cavalry in the centre. First, his united cavalry force charged to the right, and moments after joining up with the right wing, attacked the enemy left.
Look, they're just...
The Romans didn't...
So the problem with not sending any forces to fill these gaps is both of his wings were then left open to being flanked. Like the Byzantine Empire here has just made a massive mistake to me.
Expect an attack from the flank, and were forced to retreat to their original positions, losing men along the way.
It's good on Khalid for seeing the opportunity and taking it.
The left of the Caliphate's army was about to engage the Byzantine right. Initially, the Arabs were getting the worst of the fight, and were about to break and flee again. However, Khalid was on his way. He sent one unit of his cavalry to exploit the gap between the enemy right and centre right, and charged the rest into the side of the Roman right. As mentioned, this was the best Roman infantry, so they resisted longer than their counterparts and suffered fewer casualties, but still retreated. The cavalry unit sent to attack the Roman centre right surprised the latter, managing to break in and killing the commander of this group. The Romans...
They just assassinated the commander of the, I'd say, middle right. That's so jokes. In the midst of battle, they've snuck around behind and attacked the general. Wow. It's so jokes. It's so
recovered
jokes.
from their surprise and pushed back the attackers.
It don't matter. They got the assassination king. The assassination. I'm just thinking like Warhammer, and you just send like a unit to go take out like a lead person. You're just like, I got my points back. It was worth it.
However, seeing that their flanks were retreating, the centre also broke off and returned to their starting positions.
That's some heavy casualties though, boys.
Both parties probably suffered similar casualties,
Okay.
with the majority of the Arab losses during the early retreat.
It definitely looked like
right
an Arab
lost the most
victory
troops,
to me.
and
though.
that would prove to be important during
Or
the
a
next
Muslim
day,
victory.
as this detachment started its advance alongside the whole army, but stopped well short of the enemy army, with archers on both sides entering a half-hearted skirmishing contest.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the Roman centre-right engaged the Arabs, but this attack only served to tie up this portion of the opposing army. The main attack targeted the right and centre-right of the Muslim army, and although initially the Roman onslaught was slowed, their numbers started to play a role. The Muslims started to retreat, especially on the right flank, where their line was pressed all the way up to the camp yet again. This allowed the Romans to increase the pressure on the rightmost units of the Muslim centre-right and start turning the line. Amir's corps finally reformed and returned to the battle, but all their efforts only managed to stabilise the line. The Arab cavalry in the second line attempted to outflank the Romans, but Canatir moved his own to block off this advance. Seeing that the Roman right was being passive, Khalid deduced that his left was safe. He moved the reserve cavalry to the right and charged the Roman flank. The Byzantine commander attempted to move more troops from his second rank to widen his front, and it worked for some time. However, the Romans now lacked their previous depth, and with this advantage negated, the Arabs in the other parts of the line started to push back. Approaching dusk, the continuation of the battle became impossible, and the attackers disengaged, retiring to their initial line. It is clear that the Romans were getting frustrated, as they expected their numbers to prevail at this point in the engagement. In the first 3 days, the Romans probably lost more troops, but they still outnumbered their foe. Meanwhile, for Khalid, the main worry was the losses among the Yemeni archers and on the right flank.
See.
The Roman plan...
Yeah, he barely does have any archers left. Oh, his right flank is suffering big damage as well.
The next day was to attack the right half of the Caliphate's army, to divide it and encircle each corps separately, and then do the same with the left half. To that end, their left attacked the Muslims, and soon the right flank of Khalid's army was shoved back yet again, but not as far as in previous days. Made up mostly of the Armenians, the Roman centre-left was equally successful against the Muslim centre-right. This time, the Roman troops were able to turn this portion of the Arab line, which opened up space between their corps, and the Christian Arab light cavalry, which was stationed in reserve behind the centre, was commanded to charge into this gap. The Muslims were suffering heavy casualties, and it was becoming clear that Khalid needed to move to the area to stop the Romans from winning.
Looking good.
Before he did that though, he sent word to the left and centre-left, ordering them to advance and tie up the forces in front of them. With that, the Arab commander divided his cavalry into two halves. One of them moved to the left and attacked the Armenians from the side and rear, while Khalid himself moved against the Christian Arabs. The arrival of the reinforcements invigorated the beleaguered Muslims, and they counterattacked. The fight here continued for a few hours, until eventually the Muslims started gaining the upper hand. Engaged from three sides, the more heavily armoured and disciplined Armenians suffered some casualties, but were still able to retreat in relative order. Their Christian Arab allies weren't as able to defend themselves, and lost many hundreds before they were able to return to their initial position. Seeing that their centre had fallen back, the Roman left also disengaged. However, the left half of the Muslim army was still in melee. Initially, the Arabs had the upper hand as their charge surprised the Romans, but their commanders steadied the troops, and soon they were pushing back. The small number of Arab archers proved to be their undoing, as the Romans had the upper hand in skirmishes. Apparently, the arrows did so much damage to the forces of the Caliphate that later Arab sources called it the Day of Lost Eyes. Unable to withstand the volleys, the Arabs started to pull back. Shortly after, they were followed by the Romans.
This is a really good battle. It's really back and forth here. It's just one thing after the other. Obviously, the Romans have a lot more numerical advantage. That's why I think they're staying in this fight. I don't think they would have been able to stay in the fight if they didn't have their numbers. It's really interesting. The Muslim Arab army is starting to look weak. It is not looking good for them.
Had the Muslim forces on the back foot and in full flight. All of them except the leftmost unit of the centre, which managed to crush the enemy detachment in front of it and attacked the right side of the Roman centre. Eventually, this group was overwhelmed.
Look at the impact on the other side now on the left.
Camps, but they were chased by the Romans. According to the Arab sources, the Muslim women joined their brethren in the fight against the attackers. It is impossible to confirm it, but it seems that by the end of the fourth day of the battle, the Romans were either pushed back or disengaged on their own. Both sides were extremely tired and battered. Some sources mention that there was an attempt to negotiate from the Romans and that the Arabs refused. But in any case, the army spent the 19th of August resting. Khalid made just one change to the formation. All of his horsemen were drawn into one large detachment behind the right-wing infantry, save for one cavalry unit which was sent north into the desert. At the dawn of August 20th, the 6th day of the battle, both sides charged and engaged in a melee across the line. After the melee began, Khalid sent a portion of his cavalry forward with an order to attack the side of the Roman left, but upon their approach, Roman cavalry wheeled around their footmen and blocked their advance. That was the moment the Arab commander was waiting for, as the rest of his horsemen moved forth, attacking the Roman cavalry from the side and rear.
And there is
soon
that
the Roman horsemen
movement
were
Khalid
crushed,
has.
and the Arabs attacked the infantry, which broke under the attack from three sides and started falling back to the centre. The Muslim right now attacked the Roman centre left from the flank and rear. Meanwhile, the commanders of the Roman army noticed that their left-wing cavalry was being routed from the field by the consolidated Arab cavalry, and they attempted to counter that by bringing their mounted troops together. Unfortunately for the Romans, it was too late, and before they were able to form up, Khalid smashed into them, routing them. The Roman cavalry wasn't able to resist for long, and promptly started to leave the field of battle.
Absolute crushing victory.
Back east, the Armenians were defending against attacks from two sides, and for now were able to hold off the assailants. However, after Khalid dealt with the Roman cavalry and made sure that they wouldn't return, his horsemen charged into the rear of the Armenian formation. They collapsed under the charge and started retreating to the southwest. The Arabs repositioned to attack the centre right and the right of the Roman infantry, but before they did, the latter fled on their own, again to the southwest, towards the only crossing over the river. All the while, the Muslim cavalry blocked off their retreat from the north and footmen from the east. The remains of the Roman army were hoping to cross Wadi al-Rikad, but the 500-strong Arab mounted unit sent away into the desert had already been commanded to block off this crossing.
Oh, it's just not
Understanding
looking good.
that they were in a trap,
That's
the Roman
why.
officers attempted.
That's why the soldiers went. I was like, what happened to those knights that went super far back over here? They blocked the passageway. That's it. It's over. This battle's over.
To form up some kind of
I was saying
defensive
it was
line,
back and forth, but no, it's
before
just
they
over.
could do it, they were attacked by the cavalry from the north and the infantry from the east. It was a slaughter, and many thousands were killed in this encirclement, with some units managing to cross the river by swimming. Around half of the Roman army lay dead on the plain of Yarmouk, while the Muslims lost less than a fifth of troops.
And I would say that is a great victory for the Muslims indeed. Wow. Wow indeed. I think it is time to leave this episode here and leave the next 19 minutes for the next episode, which will be part 5 of this episode. I am really enjoying this. There's a lot to take in there. Khalid seems very, very good and capable commander. Also very inspiring to the troops, which is quite interesting. And yeah, just in general, that last battle was intense. It was back and forth for a while, and then just that last day, Khalid, the Muslims themselves just like, this is it, we've got to do it, we're going to use our tactics of hiding men in the desert like we always do, and then just get a perfect outmaneuvering position on him. Really good. Really good. I really enjoyed it. If you guys have enjoyed my reaction, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but I will catch you in the next video.